So we're roughly at 2001. My timelines may be a little off. It was a very long time ago. Uh, 2001. I, I had gotten past the implosion of two small groups. Um, I had gotten integrated into a third one. At this point, my position was group intern, so assistant, like a co-leader kind of thing. Um, and I become very close to my leader. I was making friends with a lot of the members, um, but I was seeing some stuff because once again, I was in a group where there were quite a few. Most of them were troubled youth. There were quite a few issues, and I was starting to ask some questions. I was really starting to ask some questions about, you know, um, how Jesus ministered and what ministry was supposed to look like and what was important. Um, and we hit to the point, so had taken a trip back to the States. My older sister Gretchen had gotten married, came back. September 11th happened. I was feeling a pull towards missions um, elsewhere in addition to Hong Kong. And I mean, some of that at this point, I would say again, was part of that church was a very missions oriented church. And but I was praying about what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to go. I showed up like I did every year. Every year, my church hosted a missions conference because not only did they have a network of 100 churches in Hong Kong itself, they had a network of, I don't even know the number, a huge number of churches worldwide that also followed the cell church model. Um, so some of you might have heard other ways to talk about the model, like G12 is a very popular Asian model. So we hit November 2001, and I'm showing up to this conference. By this point, I'd also just started working. So I'd been tutoring high school students as a job, part-time job, for a couple of years at this point for income. I hadn't taken anything remotely full-time, and even this next job would not really be full-time. But it took, with the amount of ministry I had going on in church, it was about all I could handle. So I just started teaching in a kindergarten, which I did for 5 years, teaching English as a second language. Um, but I had enough of my week free to go to this missions conference, and then there was going to be, like, it was two conferences back to back, and one of them was missions and one of them was general, is what I remember. And it was really like I had mentioned when we first moved to Hong Kong. I was like, God, why am I here? What are you speaking to me about? And over the next week at that missions conference, just person after person after person that I had not met before began speaking prophetically into my life about God's calling. And it's something I still consider defining. So I knew two things basically coming out of this, even though the words encompassed more than two things. I knew that my calling somehow involved God's heart filling my heart and impacting broken people, which absolutely resonated with me. I didn't have specifics in terms of, what I'm doing now as a prayer-based therapist or a prayer minister. Um, I didn't know that much, but it was pointing in that direction. And The second was that my impact was supposed to be beyond Hong Kong to the nations. Now, at that time, no one could have predicted social media. No one could have predicted the ability to impact nations without physically going there. I did come out convinced that I was going to some restricted access nation, you know, in a place where I would have to go secretly with another profession. And I came out convinced I was going somewhere that was dangerous for white people, which I think was a misinterpretation of what God was actually speaking to me based on the church culture and other things. But at the same time, the gist of it was that healing was going to be a huge aspect of my calling, and that it was meant to be beyond Hong Kong. And both have been partially fulfilled at this point. I don't view it to be completed. And what came out of that was a even more intensified passion for ministry to be beyond what I'd seen. So a lot of what I'd seen had been seeker sensitive, very much focused on evangelism, which is very important. You know, I'm not bashing evangelism, but in terms of in the church itself, there was an emphasis on living out scripture over knowing scripture. The people that I discipled were some of the more scripturally literate people around because I was from a different background. But there would be individuals thrust into leadership 3 months after getting saved. There was not, with the model and the emphasis on growth, there wasn't always time for the level of depth that I was beginning to believe was important. And, you know, I was seeing a lot of things in church that I started to question. And I would say that before the solidifying, you know, before a confirmation of purpose for me, you know, I just poured myself wholeheartedly into becoming the best minister by this church's standards. And I began to wonder if multiplying a small group wasn't really a litmus test of anything. And I began to wonder, or I should say I began to hunger for something more. And so in the process of this, things got more difficult, which I've discovered often happens after receiving the solidification of a calling. I became a small group leader again. And when I became a small group leader, I suddenly became hyper aware of the amount of hunger it didn't feel there was in my small group. And at that point, with the knowledge I had, I thought deliverance was the answer. And so I'm going to talk about this piece in my next video.